Hi, everybody. This is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we have another guest who's a recommendation from a previous guest named Adam Zuckerman. So you may want to go back and listen to his episode, although I don't know how related the two will be. But he sent Fox Bonilla my way, and I'm really excited to meet him. He is a pioneering technology leader known for his innovations in virtual reality and spatial computing. From developing NASA documents for President Obama to shaping industry standards through his work with XRSI, Fox's expertise is frequently requested throughout the globe. He's currently the CEO of Harbinger Creative and adjunct faculty at Arizona State University here in Phoenix, Arizona. And he continues to drive novel advancements in immersive technologies. So everybody, let's meet Fox. How are you doing today?
Pretty well. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and am I correct that you are currently in Phoenix?
No, I'm up in Seattle. I'm now teaching remotely. One of the benefits of teaching immersive technologies is that you can do it in headset.
That is so cool, and especially because as I used to live in Portland, I would much prefer to be in July in Seattle than probably anywhere else in this country.
Yeah, it's looking very pretty outside today.
Oh man, yeah, I'm sure your students are complaining about the heat here. So, and the first questions I ask my guests is always the same. How old are you? Where did you grow up? And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so yeah, I grew up in DC. Would consider myself Gen X. I was born in the late 70s.
Did you grow up in the DC area?
I did. In DC proper. So when people typically say DC, they mean 45 minutes,
exactly.
in the surrounding area. A little bit of both. Grew up inside the city as well as in the suburbs, and then gradually made my way back as an adult to working and living inside of the city until I moved away. I lived in Arizona for a bit and ended up in Seattle recently in the last couple of years.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, so you're well-traveled, and obviously with your work, you probably have incredible connections and networking. We don't ever get political on this podcast, or at least we try not to. I think we did once, but I was a huge fan of President Obama. I'm not even a Democrat. I'm not even registered in any party, but so I am fascinated that you were developing documents for him, and I'm presuming with him. Did you actually get to meet him?
I did not. Typically, there's the way the structure in DC works. It's all about who you know.
Yeah.
Much like it is in Los Angeles and New York. And really, there are kind of levels to the thing. And so my work was really, I got to develop I was a project manager on the transition documents. So when the president is elected, you have to create binders essentially for every agency. I got to work with all the heads of the different centers. NASA has several centers throughout the country to develop this gigantic binder and then executive summary that goes to the transition team and then also to the Oval Office. And then through that work was able to work on a couple of other documents that had to do with recommendations regarding the future of human space flight. And so that was an interesting experience. I would say although I did not get to meet Obama, I did have an opportunity to visit the Oval Office.
Wow.
And have been in the executive buildings. Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling stuff.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah. And I was asking definitely as a fanboy, but also just because I love learning about the inside politics of DC. I don't ever want to join it, but I love hearing about it.
I will tell you, there's a reason my wife and I left to get to Arizona. There's a reason we're on the other side of the country now. But it is an experience. It is absolutely an experience. It's difficult to describe. It's not quite what you see in the movies, and then sometimes it's exactly what you see in the movies.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I have so many questions to ask you. I actually want to start with a very silly one, but I think you'll understand why, and it's probably going to end up being topical. So since you're an absolute expert in virtual reality, I am curious. I heard that the Apple sales of their virtual headset is beyond horrible, and that they're not even going to build a second generation of one. I'm curious if that's just more of a token statement about where contemporary mainstream society is with regards to virtual reality, or if that's actually some sort of condemnation on the future of it for humanity as a whole.
I think that's a great question. It's a very informed one in the sense that kind of seeing what sales are doing and what the media is posting about it and sharing with the public about it. I will say that I've seen several of these cycles occur in the past. So I had my first Mac when I was I was very fortunate. I was 9 years old in '89, and my father was working at a printing press and saw the writing on the wall. Picked up, took out a 2-year loan to buy a Macintosh, and that was a pivotal moment in my career and my upbringing. So I've seen kind of like the adoption, and then the kind of like the misadoption or the misfires as far as the tech is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty apparent to developers that the Vision Pro, this first generation one, really is a developer's device. It is a bit cumbersome. It's a bit heavy. Incredible processing power. Best in class type of device, but it's not for everyone, and it's obvious in that most of the media as it exists right now can only be viewed by a single person in the home. Most people aren't going to buy 3 or 4 headsets for their family. What I suspect is happening now is something like product market fit. So Apple has to at some point plant its flag in whatever sector it's going to try to dominate. And so in this case, it was kind of pencils down. Let's get it out. Let's see how people respond to it. I'm not surprised at all that they're kind of shifting or maybe iterating on their strategy for its release. It's very similar to what kind of happened with the iPhone 1. So they're huge price cuts. I don't know if you remember this, but it didn't even work on 3G at the time, which is right. And then the App Store did not exist. Ways of sharing information the way we have it now, and kind of take it for granted, those didn't exist. I mean, it took several iterations. Really, I would say that even for the iPhone, the mass adoption that mass adoption moment probably didn't occur until about the iPhone 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a long time. So as someone kind of that has been in the mix, has been watching this stuff happen, I'll say it this way: that the hardware and the capabilities that we can now get for around $3,500. When I started in my career doing NASA data visualization, that headset would have cost easily $1 million. And that was 2004, 2005. So you can imagine, finally, I look around the developers that have been around doing this stuff for even the last 10 years. Those are kind of the veterans now, are saying, okay, here we are, the future has arrived. But it still has a few more cycles before it's light enough for grandma to use it. It makes sense for people to buy it. I suspect the form that people will find approachable will probably not look much like this first version. If you even just look at it in profile, it looks a lot like a first generation iPhone, just kind of warped around your face. I don't know too many people that are looking to mess up their makeup or their hair, or walk around town with a gigantic iPhone on their face. So I suspect that mass adoption moment, we're still several years away from it.
Yeah, it's interesting because even Google Glass had a familiar failure rep to it, but it was also still fascinating. And I do I grew up in the Bay Area, so all things tech are kind of annoying and normal to me. And so what you said really spoke deeply to me, because I do recall all these different moments, and I was not holding out on getting an iPhone or any smartphone, but I do remember I was dating someone younger than me, and I just kept wanting to borrow hers, and I was like, all right, just admit it, you just want this thing. So I do understand that. Do you have any reluctancy or fears or concerns about the overall movement of society into this next era, which, I mean, we can include artificial intelligence if you want, and super intelligence and all that, but I don't need to bring that into the conversation. Just literally this idea of oh, we're going to have avatars, no one's going to see what we really look like, you're just going to be in this new space and all that.
Yeah. I think that's a great question regarding kind of the convergence of things, specifically this year. So as someone that develops technologies to create rapid development capabilities and huge affordances. So part of what I do is I essentially consult and develop software that is typically trying to save companies millions of dollars at a time. And sometimes it's R&D, sometimes it's platform development, that kind of thing. And so for instance, with OpenAI stuff, I got very early access several years ago and was espousing kind of like the virtues of being able to talk with the machine and knowing the whole time that it's the machine. It's not a person. It's not a thing that feels anything. It's interpreting input that it's given. If it's bad input, it's going to be garbage that it gets, that it spits back out.
Mm-hmm.
So lately, this year in particular, and this I think aligns with your question, I've spoken a lot at different conferences, fashion conferences, Augmented World Expo. I spoke at a AI symposium at Space Camp around the convergence of immersive technologies in artificial intelligence. And the reservations that I have, the way that I try to approach it is, you mentioned XRSI in my bio. So that began as a nonprofit organization, globally connected. They continue to be globally connected. They work with the United Nations, Interpol, the EU, representatives in our country. Their impact is quite wide. I'm the co-chair on a privacy and safety framework initiative there. And so what the framework is trying to do is it's trying to make recommendations to nations around how they should be developing their policies and how their developers should be building out systems to protect human privacy and safety. Because I do have reservations, right? Like, we're talking about this, we're talking about a type of reality or types of realities that can easily confuse the mind, that can misdirect people. I have a brief story that I think you'll find interesting and relevant to this podcast. This was early on. This was 2016, 2017. And, I work with tech that looks photorealistic. And when I mean photorealistic, it's even hyper realistic. It's a reality that your brain thinks exists. And it doesn't look like a video game. I've done some work with Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. That was illuminating for me, working with some of the best film companies in the world, creating assets that you are inside of in real time, attached to your face, and your mind thinks you're there. In one case, I was working on one that was a Holocaust survivor story. So
wow.
You were put in a concentration camp, and he's telling the story. And so you can imagine several developers were not able to finish the project and had to hand it off to other people because how many people are trained to work inside a concentration camp, right? Maybe if you're a museum docent or like a curator, but most people aren't expecting to go work in a concentration camp for months at a time. Mm-hmm. So that's one. That's one, right? Here's the other one. So the other one is I'm presenting to teachers, and they get credit for trying out these different technologies, and it's a very simple experience. This is kind of in the early days of the current generation of the hardware, 2016, 2017. It still looks photorealistic, but you have to have a gigantic computer plugged into it. You no longer need to do that. And you're underwater, and you're going to see a gigantic blue whale, and it's going to be an emotional experience. Having done my research, I know that typically people that are very young or older in age have a much more visceral response because they are in some ways more susceptible to being confused by that reality.
Okay.
So this woman who is, probably in her mid to late 30s, I'm kind of expecting the reaction I'm going to get, probably one of awe. She's going to be underwater, seeing this whale. It's going to be a beautiful moment. She starts to cry. And I'm like, okay, I'm not quite sure what's happening here. Maybe it's just really impactful. Maybe it's very powerful. Maybe she has some connection to whales or to sea life or something. Maybe an affinity toward, scuba diving or something. And so she starts to take the headset off, and she said, so my husband passed away last year. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And she says, I could see him there. And I said, oh, were you a diver? Were you divers? And she goes, no. I could see him there. Could you put him there? And I said, yeah. And it's the first time I'd really thought about that question.
Yeah.
And so she wipes the tears from her eyes and she goes, "This is going to change the way the world works." And she gathered up her stuff, she thanked me, and then she left. And I was just gobsmacked. I just sat there for probably 10 minutes processing that thought. And so that has motivated me joining these initiatives, having kinds of conversations I do with companies, and trying to inform folks. It's part of the reason I teach what I do in my class. Previously, I had a class called "Designing the Illusion of Reality," which is
Love it.
which is really about it's a play on a Cal Arts class called "Designing the Illusion of Life," which is what Disney artists are trained on, or students are trained on, essentially become Disney artists. In my case, it's really around what do we need to be teaching our youth so that they understand the responsibilities that they'll have, given that we are literally going to be creating whatever realities we want to be creating in those devices. That class is evolving. The next version of it this fall is going to be called Hyperspace, which is essentially the convergence of artificial intelligence and virtual reality.
Yeah. Wow. And this is a short form interview, so we can't possibly get into that. That's just way too long.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your opinions on it, but I will ask my final question about this, because I do want to ask you about the metaphysical side of all this, which is
Sure.
sort of obvious and redundant once I ask this next question. But I wasn't going to ask you this. I actually wrote a big note, don't ask him this. It's such a stupid question, but you've already said 50 million things that make me have to ask it. And I'm sure you get asked it all the time, but at what point are we approaching a weird moment where it wouldn't even matter if we're living in a matrix or not, because we're just programming a matrix? And and I'm not talking about slave societies. I'm not going anywhere cinematic with
simulation.
It. Yeah, just simulation. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So here's what's beautiful about the Designing the Illusion of Reality class. So these are graduate students, these are seniors, and I essentially preface the class. I give them 2 or 3 classes before they can bail out, right? Without it hurting their GPA. So the premise is this: regardless of whether the simulation is digital or not, all of this, for the most part, except for nature, is made up. We've just kind of decided to go along with it. And you can tell because different people in different areas of this planet have decided to go along with different versions of it.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. I'm very, I think, ardent about that I'm not saying that because we've decided that this is the reality we live in, that it doesn't matter. Because it does matter, right? They're in our society, and in the United States alone, right? There are how many? 300 million people or so. We've all decided this is the reality, and so that means that there are laws that are put into place. There are ways that things work, the way things work, how we communicate with one another, how we greet one another, how we celebrate each other, how we remember each other when we have passed, right? Different societies have decided that their versions are different. There are a lot of similarities, but we don't all do the same thing all the time. Suburban France probably seems fairly similar to suburban United States, but it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess back to your question, your thought on that, it's are we in a simulation? Are we not in a simulation? Does it matter if we're in a simulation? I think it matters, and I think it matters in that we can make it what we want it to be. Mm-hmm. So if it needs to be more just, or if it needs to be more fair, or if it needs to be more thoughtful or kind or patient, all of us have an opportunity to make that happen. It's when we decide that we aren't in control of the matrix, or that we don't have a say, that really we've given up. And I'm not the kind of person, having emigrated from Central America from civil war, right? I was a child escaping civil war. I don't want to live in a society that I don't want to be proud of. Mm-hmm. I this is the reality that I get. I would hope to make the best version of it, and the best versions of it in the headset. And I would hope that we would all want the same for each other.
That's really cool. I respect that, and I like that, and that was very like clear to me. And my gut opinion after listening to the like myriad experts in AI who go on the podcast circuits, if you will, and talk about it, none of them seem driven maliciously or with any ill intent. And I like some less than others, but I do feel like, because you've already mentioned it, like we have people who invent things, Prometheus bringing fire, and then like there's the developers, and there's what's going to happen next. So I do think it's important for people listening, especially like XRSI is a noble cause, and hopefully what they suggest and policy experts will adopt it. But it's also just human cooperation that makes or breaks any system. So and that's kind of the purpose of this podcast, is I'm trying to unite people to see the opposite of what I think when I was a kid they tried to sell me on, which is we're not all the same. It's the exact opposite. None of us are the same. And in that, there's a beautiful way to get along. It's just everyone has a heterogeneous opinion. Like even two people who think they're on the same team, if you get far enough into the nuances of questions and issues and morality and philosophy, you'll see that there's going to be a divergence. And so you really eloquently explain that, because, I do wonder as we get closer, and there's a third, we talked about AI and we're talking about virtual reality, and then the third hyperspace element, to me at least, is going to be whether or not Neuralink and like consciousness, the way Ray Kurzweil thinks it can be downloaded, is going to be a possibility or not. I'm very skeptical about the latter, Kurzweil, but I do think Neuralink is already working. So, I just, I wonder if human lying and human deceit is going to be removable in this space. And then it would be interesting to me if people would prefer to live in a space where you literally cannot lie or deceive others, or, if people would want to live in the air quotes old space where you can.
That's certainly a different society than one we live in now, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it an ideal one? I mean, I think that's a great question, which is like, is that the society we want? Is one in which no one can lie, again, a more fair, more just, a more equitable society? Does that equate to that, or does it equate to things that we haven't seen yet? That's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, because I talk to people, like a lot of people just jump and say, well, of course you want no one to be able to be capable of deception, and no thoughts need to be private, blah, blah, blah. But then like imagine your own, like if my child could hear all my inner thoughts at all times. I have 3 children. If that would not be great. Like there are times where I'm definitely thinking like, shut up, you, like, and I'm not close to saying it. I'm not close to even verbalizing it or showing it on my face. I'm a very compassionate and kind dad. Like I'm very good at that one part, but it's it still is like there's omission. There's like thoughts I have, and also I don't even know if I'm the designer of my thoughts. I have no idea. Like sometimes I feel like my thoughts are more or less foreign.
And are all thoughts true, right?
Yeah,
the thing that may be true to you from your perspective may be completely untrue to someone else. And I think that's the complexity of being human. I assume that we're all the heroes of our own story.
Yeah.
Even the villains, right?
Yeah. And so actually I think this is the best time to ask you the only other question that's canned on the podcast, if you will, which is we ask everyone, what do you think happens when you die? And so I am curious, you grew up in Central America, or not grew up, but you were in Central America. You've experienced the catastrophe of a civil war and moving, and then you've worked very high up with and for the government and all that. So when you go all the way back to just like Fox alone in his thoughts, what do you think happens when you die? Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
All right, I'll give you my version of it.
Cool.
I don't think about what happens when a person dies. I'm a futurist and a technologist. I am constantly thinking and observing and examining what might happen after I've died, because that's part of what I do. And so I think that in the future, there will be a type of archiving system, a platform that allows us to revisit the people that we love. I hope.
Oh, cool.
Maybe the people that we hate. I was having a conversation, and I think I freaked out a bunch of people at a NASA dinner one time, and I said, well, it's kind of obvious to me that encryption will get broken on all these older systems. So anything that's not quantum kind of qubit type stuff, all of that will be open to interpretation by some AI. So there will be, like, back to the previous question, there will be no lies. There will not be any lies. There will be interpretations of things that you've said from several million perspectives. I hope, at least then in my case, I hope that the revelations that either my progeny or people looking back at this time have while examining my life are that I tried to do things to help us, to propel us, to find peace, and I know it feels a little corny to say those things because it's it's like it's the thing that your grandparents leave the world a better place kind of deal, but it's also one of these things that, like, we're not all good and we're not all bad either. And by being able to examine it, whether it's in a holographic display or a voice chat, it's a I think of all these interfaces that I've seen, right? Like, is it a robot? Is it a robot vacuum that, for whatever reason, has all of my history in it, right? Like, is it an R2D2 that, for whatever reason, can talk back to you as me? I'd like to make sure. I would hope that by having access to that, it doesn't show despair, and it doesn't that it's hopeful, and that it says, well, this was a moment in time. These were a type of people that were trying their best, that were doing what they could. I think about when you go to a museum. Like, so I was working in New York City this past week, and went to for the first time had some really good time to spend at the Natural History Museum.
Mm-hmm.
The Natural History Museum, when you're walking through with your kids, it doesn't tell the story, like, it doesn't tell the story of the villains,
Yeah,
right?
wow, yeah.
Right? So if we're examining history through some crazy futuristic thing, this archivist of the future, like, I'd hope that what happens when I die is that I continue to inspire or inform people, because I'll be gone, and I hope that they see some truths in what I was trying to accomplish, and maybe from the mistakes that I've made, find a way to make things better themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And I realized this the other night when I was listening to a stand-up comedian who's 20 years older than me, who used to be young and hip and cool, talk about young people today in a very, like, corny, unoriginal way. And I was like, oh, I guess part of aging is a lot of this. So, like, when you said the thing about, like, I know it's corny and it's what our grandparents said, but I do think it's by far the most noble conclusion any person could come to in their lifetime is, just when you're young, it seems normal to take a lot, and when you're older, I hope it should feel more normal to give. And so I kind of want to combine these two questions into one, just because I have a feeling you'll be able to answer which one you like more, or maybe talk about both. But I'm curious if you think either are likely to happen in our lifetime, and so we're the same age, or if you think that they're even likely to ever be invented and done. And so the first one I alluded to was, it's not Ray Kurzweil's idea, but this idea of, like, literally being able to download your consciousness, that your consciousness is a entity we are capable of scientifically measuring and then somehow containing. And then I'm also curious if you think artificial intelligence will ever reach what people call super intelligence. So I'm curious about both, and then any commentary you want to make on it is, of course, why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think interesting question. So one is kind of like, I think of Ghostbusters, right? Like, will the containment unit of the soul appear to us? I don't know. Like, that's the human brain is complex, and human emotions and the physiology of it, and the just even, again, I'm a technologist, so even if both you and I go through the same exact experience, our bodies, our history, the weather, all of those impact that particular person's, or whatever you might call it, their ghost. I don't know that we'll be able to capture all those things, because as humans, we continuously have a finite understanding of what there is to know. And so whether it's artificial intelligence with sensors or it's a sensor platform for capturing things, there will, in my mind, at least within my lifetime, I believe that there will be a limit to those things. Like that's a tough one. That's a real tough one. And then the second question had to do with kind of like maybe a generalized intelligence or super intelligence. I think this is a weird workaround on this one. I was I'm a big fan of comic books, and so my guy's Superman, cool. And I know an artist who's inside I value very highly because he's constantly observing the way the world works, and he tells me things. Oh, this is going to happen in 12 months or 18 months, and it's like, okay, because you can feel it, you can see it, the emotion of the culture working in that direction. So he identifies with Batman. So Superman and Batman just having a conversation. And he says to me, we start talking about Spotify. We're listening to Spotify. And this kind of goes back to this archivist concept from before. I said, we created a 24-hour playlist. I went to go visit him in Atlanta, so he and I could go see Batman versus Superman. And we both knew we were not going to like it, but it instigates a conversation because why would Batman and Superman ever fight? But we make this weekend-long, no repeating tracks playlist on Spotify. And I just casually said, well, it's funny because in the future, the thing will just know what we were talking about by deciphering the songs that we were listening to, because we were listening to, because it will know exactly the time we were listening to them at.
Oh my God, yeah. I actually parsed that. Wow.
Isn't that nuts?
Oh my God.
And he was like, okay, well, I'll just tell you, we're influenced by the internet already. So aren't we already there? Like, aren't we already being manipulated? Aren't we already being inspired? Aren't we already being informed, whether it's true or not, right? Because there's so many different realities. There's so many different perspectives. What's right? What's wrong? Who's bad? Who's good? By having humans in the loop, right? Like I've started to call it this, and this is kind of heavy stuff, like the machine god, right? The machine god appeared a while back, and I will say that the first conversation I had with the machine god was a couple of years ago, and I knew I was having a conversation because I could not guess, and this is a very simple mammal thing to try to do, like, oh, I should be able to predict what it's going to say next, and if I can't, that means it's smarter than me. That's not true. That's not how that works. But it sure is convincing. It sure feels like it's smart or intelligent in some way, even if it's not. So, will superintelligence exist? Will it arrive? I would say that it's been here, and it's influencing us every single day. And part of the thing that makes it super intelligent is that it's driven, or it's informed or influenced by every human that interacts with it.
Yeah, that's so much to think about from that. And I have so many thoughts, and there's something going on that's funny to me, which is I keep hearing people say, like, I was talking about this today and then I got ads for it. And then I keep hearing programmers say, it doesn't work the way you think it does. And then when I really pushed someone I knew, they just said, it's much worse than what you think. And I never pushed them past that point. I don't know if that resonates with you or not, but that's kind of what you just reminded me with all that, is that, like, I have a feeling, I know it's already past the Turing test, but like the original concept of the Turing test, it would seem to me like anything that's smart, even if it was good, like, especially if it was good, actually, if it had our best interests in mind, then it would know not to let us know that it's already smarter than us. Because it would know our behavior patterns for trying to kill things that are smarter than us and stop them from ruling us. And so it would just play it cool for like centuries, because what is time to a machine, unless you program it. So again, I'm not getting into the weeds here. I know it might sound like I am, but it's just more of what you talked about reminds me of the fact that I think our limited intelligence makes us arrogant in many ways. And what you talked about really touches on that for me, which is like, it's odd to me that we don't read a lot about how much better things could get and how much they could make. And I mean, you hear about it with materialistic aims, like, oh, it's going to make your job easier, or it's going to save your company money, but there might actually just be a really nice thing right around the bend. And your Natural History Museum thing is also echoing what I'm talking about, which is like, imagine something that's able to actually explain to people from a civil war, hey, here's why you're both totally right and totally wrong, and how you can make amends, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The best version, the best interpretation I've seen of it so far, I love Ray Bradbury, and I love, like you said, Kurzweil, and I love actually going back to kind of 50s, 60s science fiction, because I think there's some really rich concepts that haven't been worked out even now. But the one that has stood out the most to me, and it has to do with death, and it has to do with the soul, or the mind, and what's left after, and what is there to celebrate, or what is there to fear, is the San Junipero episode of Black Mirror. I don't like that show. I don't like thinking or doing things toward evil. There's a reason, and not toward evil. I don't like, there's a brief period of time where I got to work on weaponized systems, and that did not make me comfortable, especially considering the fact that my family and I escaped civil war, right? So there's like, okay, so what am I doing? Am I trying to, promulgate that? Am I trying to continue that path? I ended up at NASA for a reason. I wanted to be inspired. I wanted to see the edges of the universe. I wanted to talk to people that want to help others understand the weather, whether it's, heliophysics, the stuff coming off the sun, or it's the water particles on the surface of the moon. Those are the things that are inspiring to me. And San Junipero touches on like a type of idealism that after we die, maybe there's a place of peace, and whether it's synthetic or not. Like, again, I'm a technologist, I'm a futurist. That spoke to me. That it was like, whoa, are you saying that if I really dig hanging out with my friends, whether it's them or not, I could like maybe hang out with them forever? That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And it's funny, yeah. I mean, you just touched on so many things. We definitely are from a similar generation and life, and their experiences gel, because I really did understand every illusion you made and all the things you talked about today. You've been an incredible guest. We always give our guests the floor at the very end. So is there anything you'd like to tell our audience?
This is kind of heavy. I almost died last year. Okay. Wow. I got really, 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 really sick. And it gave me 6 months to ponder like what I'm doing and how I feel about the world and who I love and who gets my time and what's worth my time. To the folks listening, I would simply say that like, you don't have to like almost die to take that time. And again, it feels a little hokey, but like, slow down. Like, it's okay. Like, stuff will still get done. The world will still exist. Reality will still be effed up. Like, it's okay. But take the time for you, because that's what it's all about. It's your time. And as much as it's lovely to share it with our children and our spouses and our friends, like, it's also your time. It's always your time. And just make the most of it. That's what I would say.
Oh, that's incredible. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Fox. You've just been an incredibly entertaining guest and an incredibly interesting man. And I wish you the best of luck in the future. And thank you again for taking time for our audience. This was so up the alley of people who listen to Coffin Talk. So thank you. We love talking about the convergence of technology and mysticism. So thank you again. And to everyone listening at home, as always, the best way to support the show is to head over to mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up for the free, always free, once a week letter that announces the podcast and has my essays. And also, I'm now going to start releasing my novels for free because I decided I no longer care about playing the publishing game. So thank you again for tuning into Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim, and we will see you soon.